leadership requires self-awareness, but more than that, leaders need to use this self-knowledge to manage their work and life. We asked leaders in development about practicing self-leadership.
I think an important part of learning all those different skills is having a pretty strong sense of self-awareness, an inventory, as it were, of what one is good at and what one isn't good at, and how, more importantly then, how to find people who can do what you can't do. I figured out, I guess in my early 20s, that I had this very quirky kind of ability to be able to see things that other people didn't see, in the sense that I could see connections and gaps in ways that problems were being framed, or the way that challenges were being talked about, that either just were framed in such a way that they precluded whole bodies of other knowledge that could be brought into that. Or they just weren't aware of the fact that there was an existing literature on this, or that if you took a bit from over here and a bit from over there and connected them all up, maybe you could actually get a whole different way of thinking about that. And it's a bit, and as I said, I figured that out kind of when I was sort of maybe 23, 24, that that's what I could do, but I had no clue about how I could ever turn that seemingly quirky skill into a career and into a livelihood that would support a family and work in international development. I had no clue of that. But I guess I had enough self-confidence then to say, I don't have to worry about that yet. All I've got to do is get good at what I'm good at, and then figure out how to connect what I'm good at with what other people do that I know is really important, but that I couldn't claim a high degree of expertise in.
When I first started working in the Pacific, in fact, what gave me the break was a manager who was himself very self-aware and very reflective of his own leadership style. Now, he was the kind of leader that was a really visionary leader, could really draw people behind him in setting direction, very entrepreneurial in his approach, and a fantastic network and relationship builder. But he was a manager who had no time for the details. He was a big picture guy. And, me, for my part, I'm a nerd. For me, it's all about building the most efficient processes. It's about using the best evidence. And things like building relationships, they serve a purpose, but they're not my style. Now, this particular director, he knew his strengths, he knew his weaknesses, and effectively he knew he needed a nerd to balance his own strengths. He needed someone that could work in the fine details, who could build the systems and invest the time to get it right. The end result was, it certainly made for a number of heated conversations and debates at senior management team level with our very different approaches. But that also was its own really healthy environment. I could offset his gung-ho kind of approach to, we've got a vision, let's just go for it and get it done. Me as the counterbalance to kind of slow things down and to make sure we get it right the first time in order to get the best results. And he knew that. He knew that was why he brought me on. And that kind of really worked together.
Self-leadership is about getting to know yourself better. So in the leadership story, what I feel or what you feel is far more important as compared to what we say or think. Before going any further, let me refer to one of the great books by Daniel Goleman called Emotional Intelligence. The book was in 1995. So just to give you a very, very brief summary of that book, Daniel Goleman talks about three things. So there is self-awareness. In this stage, you kind of get connected with your emotions. You classify them, you tag them, you identify what triggers them, and so on and so forth. In the second stage, which is about self-regulation, you try to regulate your emotions and don't leave them at the mercy of ordinary triggers. You take control of your emotions. And if you ask me how I do it, for me it is about realizing the rather crude reality that emotions are, after all, biological impulses, that evolution has programmed us with over so many years. I mean, fear is generally considered a very negative kind of emotion, but can you imagine a world with no fear? Can you imagine how many accidents and crashes we would see every day when people do not have fear anymore? But the problem is that the same emotion of fear can, jump over you and take control of you at an unwanted time. So it is all about regulating your emotions. And in the third stage, which is about empathy, in this stage, we try to, assess what others are feeling and what kind of emotions they are having, and which is really important if you want to influence, leadership. If it is all about influence, it is very important to understand what others are feeling, because I argue the actions that people do are mostly regulated by what they feel and less about what they say or think. I mean, if you have ever been in a relationship, you know exactly what I mean. Yeah. So, and this works so much well in so many contexts. I mean, if a colleague comes to me and tells me that he or she is feeling as if they were ignored because they were not invited to the meeting. So feeling as if they are feeling ignored is not the key thing. The key thing is that they may be having a feeling of embarrassment, of fear or insecurity, and targeting that is really, really important. So yeah, emotional intelligence to me is the convergence point between self-leadership and leadership as an action. If you are understanding your emotions, if you are trying to regulate them, and if you are trying to feel what others are feeling, well done, you have just started your leadership.
All right, so in terms of self-leadership, the best example I can share is a colleague of mine. He wasn't my direct supervisor, but I would say he was based in Jordan, and we were working with the Syrian refugee crisis. We were trying to provide services to people just coming in overnight from the Syrian border into Jordan. And in terms of that person's self-leadership, she was very motivated, and she was very on top of the job that needed to be done. Her modus operandi was to encourage everyone around her by her own motivation and by her own dedication to the job. And this included working 14 hours a day, no weekends, regardless of what the weather conditions are, regardless of what you yourself might be physically feeling, which might be very taxing for development emergency programs, but it is required. When you're on the front line, you have to get that work done. So if you have a supervisor or a leader who has self-leadership skills, who are aware of their own qualities, they can motivate others to achieve tasks based on their own personalities. And the impact that it has on any project is immense. I would say it really, really affects any of the project goals that we're trying to achieve. Because if that person knows how to motivate and how to bring their own mentoring skills based on their own abilities. So at times, I can tell you about this supervisor in Jordan. She wasn't very good in international communication. English was not her first language. But she knew there were people like me who could help her in that task. People who could help her coordinate with UN agencies and with different donor bodies in, let's say, in Europe and in Northern America. And we were able to fulfill that gap which she had in her weakness, and she was very transparent about it. But other things on the ground, she led the way, and as a team, she helped us accomplish all those projects.